What if you started focusing on who more than you focused on how many? How many will always be a part of the game in marketing as we look to scale communications with the market that we serve. However, in today's episode with Ethan Beute, two-time author and podcast host, currently chief evangelist at BombBomb, he shares how this premise over who mattering more than how many from a blog post he actually wrote over a decade ago has informed his approach to podcasting for his company. Through his journey of hosting both the Customer Experience podcast and more recently Chief Evangelist, he has effectively helped BombBomb break into and expand with target accounts by leveraging the realities of the who economy. It's involved intentionally building relationships with content collaborators, aligning with sales and CS teams on the who to target for content co-creation, and continuing to invest in relationships where most marketing teams finish, dust their hands, and move on. Too soon in most cases, if you ask me. Ethan is a personal friend, an extremely intelligent marketer, and one who uniquely focuses on relationships that are so key to what we talk about on this show, which is marketing together. All right, let's hear from Ethan where his focus on relationships actually started as we get into a great conversation about how that has positively impacted his podcasting efforts for his company.
Two things come to mind. First is that relationships are our number one core value at BombBomb, and they have been from the beginning. And ultimately, I think that's connected, as cliche as it sounds in 2023. It's connected to this idea of human to human, the idea that really every decision and every success is done with, through, and for other people. And I think if we accept that as the truth, then this leads me to my second thought. The first blog post I ever wrote for BombBomb, and I'd probably written, I know that I've written more than 500. I don't know how many exactly over the past dozen years. But the first one was, who is more important than how many? And this is a new idea, but we get so enamored of, and this is where we get into like vanity metrics and things. Like when we focus on how many, and lose sight of who, then I think we're just playing a losing game long term. I'd rather, send an email to 100 people and have 50 of them open it and 10 of them respond than send it to 2,000 people and essentially wind up with the same result and annoy a lot fewer people in the process. And so I think when we focus on who shares our values, who is a potential good fit for whatever this problem or opportunity is, no matter the nature of the relationships on either side of a situation, I think we're setting ourselves up for something more sustainable.
We're going to have to resurrect that blog post, man, and bring it back if it's still on the BombBomb blog and put it in the description for this episode because I think it's really timely. I heard about a book a while back, Who Not How, and I've been exposed to that initially in entrepreneurship, in startup life. If you're thinking about, hey, we're going to solve this problem for the market, but whatever this service I want to build, I don't have this expertise. Who do I know that can fill those roles, or who can I find to fill those roles? And I think for entrepreneurs, that has been a strong shift that they can make in thinking about how do they answer problems and how do they build a team. I think it has a lot of implications in marketing. If we start to think about who, not how, we all have access to the same how. We can all start a podcast. We can all start a YouTube channel. We can all get active on LinkedIn or TikTok or Instagram. But the who is really the differentiation. As I personally got active on LinkedIn and got into B2B marketing, it was the who. It was you. It was James. It was people like John Ruggie. It was people that I met early in my foray into B2B marketing that really led to my success and the things that happened in my career and the things that happened in and for the companies that I've been a part of.
Really, it's other people understand what you're in and are now committed to it at some level, right? There's this shared buy-in. It's not just, there's nothing you're going to reach out to me about forevermore, Logan, that I'm going to say no. I might say not now, or I'm not sure, let me think about it. But there's like we are now mutually invested in the same thing. And so, just to kind of cue up the podcasting thing, it's co-created, co-promoted content, essentially. And so in this who, not how dynamic, when we co-create the solution with another person, that person doesn't just drop it and walk away. I mean, some people do, very transactionally minded people do, but in general, very transactionally minded people won't get involved in something that they're not super clear and positive on what the return is. Hence, we would categorize them as transactional.
Yeah, I can attest to that, whether it has been the last time I made a move in my career and pinging you and getting your thoughts, or you had something up your sleeve. Hey, Logan, I'm thinking about this for the podcast. Those lines of communication are forever open with, not a crazy amount of investment, in the relationship, but being able to interact through multiple iterations, whether that was creating content together, working together, sharing a meal. I think that when you focus on the who and who can I help and who can help me, and where are those symbiotic relationships, then your marketing gets better because as we've been talking about, I talked a lot in last week's episode about how the who of who you're marketing with helps you surround the people that you're trying to reach. And that's the what's in it for you, but you've got to find where's that joint value proposition? Where do I add value? So speaking of adding value, I think your podcast that we're going to unpack today, the Customer Experience Podcast, has been extremely valuable. I had the chance to help, input a little bit when that initially got off the ground. Give us a little bit of context for what that show is, how it fit into your marketing at BombBomb. And then I want to dig into how you guys approached it differently with this mindset of who, relationships, and marketing together in mind.
Yeah, we didn't have any specific hard goals, but a number of us, so that show is over 4 years old now, if you can believe it. And 250 plus episodes, I think 255, 256 as we're recording this. And we didn't have anything specific in mind, but several of us really were into podcasting. We knew that it was powerful. We were all using it to learn and grow in different ways, some professional, some personal. And so we knew it was something we wanted to pursue. And fortunately for me, there was like this kind of open window at the time. I was shifting from being VP marketing, running 2 teams inside the company, to this individual contributor, chief evangelist role. We were releasing the first book that I wrote, Rehumanize Your Business. And so I had the privilege of launching the podcast. So we knew we were going to do it. And it was like, okay, Ethan, you get to host it. And that was really the extent of it. And we knew, so for folks who aren't familiar, BombBomb is video, email, video messaging, record, send, track, screen record, do it from Gmail or Outlook, Chrome or Edge, Salesforce, Outreach, Zendesk, our web app, our mobile apps, etc., that kind of a thing. And we knew that we didn't want to do the video, email, and video messaging show because that would have been a little bit too insular. And so we picked up customer experience from the subtitle of the book. The subtitle of Rehumanize Your Business is how personal videos accelerate sales and improve customer experience. And so from there, with some help from you and James Carberry, who we've already mentioned, I organized the premise based on this idea that even in a healthy culture, we can get a bit siloed. And if customer experience is our greatest differentiator, which it is because of product parity primarily, customer control over the market, hyper competition, etc., that when we get siloed, again, even in a healthy culture, the customer gets a disjointed experience because marketing, sales, customer success, product all interact with the customer in different ways. They all are measured against the customer in different ways. And so they're all motivated against the customer in different ways. And so it winds up being a little bit disjointed. And so let's start a conversation across marketing, sales, and customer success primarily. We've certainly gone beyond that, which is kind of the blessing and the curse of being able to rope anything into a customer experience conversation. And just set off to do that. And the questions I was asking out of the gate were really a lot on behalf of our own team. And not just in service of the show and its premise. So that was kind of how it got started. I definitely was familiar with, I don't know if James's book, Content-Based Networking, had been published yet, but I was certainly familiar with the philosophy that winds up being broken down and laid out in that book. And so that was part of how we set off on that course. I reached out to people who I knew Some people I didn't know, by the way. People I'm thinking of like Anne Handley, Joseph Jaffe, people who had written books that were very influential for me personally. I was amazed out of the gate who said yes to a show that didn't even exist, right? People want to say yes. People are interested in your success, even in ways that you wouldn't expect. And so whether it's, in a formal partnership type of conversation or whether it's in something kind of middle of the road, like would you guest on this podcast that doesn't exist yet? It has no audience. It has no artwork. It has no anything. I can't point to anything and say this show is going to be successful and you're going to be glad you did it. People said yes, not knowing what to expect on the other side. And I certainly have done the same thing for other podcast hosts for the same reason.
I love what you said there, and I'm going to have to tee you up to talk about some of the things that you do, because I think you give some great credit to the generosity of folks who you were able to engage with. But I think that your approach of being a strategic relationship builder and upholding that core value that is number one at BombBomb of relationships led to some of that as well. As much as you want to give all the love to the folks to saying yes, what were some of the things that you think you did differently that led to some of those yeses? Today, we're talking about getting guests on a podcast that doesn't exist yet and the content collaboration that comes out of that. But I'm a big believer in content collaboration in big ways. It's a podcast. Hey, let's do an event together, or just small ways. Hey, you had a great LinkedIn post. Let's hop on, let's record some video, let's create some clips. And I think whether you're making a big ask, kind of a medium ask, or a small ask in content collaboration, how you approach it does make a big difference in how many yeses you get and how much co-creation you're able to do with folks. What are some of the things that you do differently? I know all these, but for the benefit of our listener, let's dive in, man.
Feel free to add on. I mean, the one thing that I'll go to, and this is not as self-serving as it sounds. I mean, you can use a variety of tools to do this. I think reaching out with a personal video message, and by personal, I mean truly bespoke for that person, and the sincerity, specifically two things, the sincerity and enthusiasm for why you want this to happen. I think there's no better way to convey it than through a video message, right? Some of these, like I didn't know Joseph, I'm just going to two people in particular. I would throw Joey Coleman in here as well. People I did not know who had been very influential for me. When you reach out to those people, they're not going to take your phone call. You're not just going to cold call them generally. And so whether you have their email address or whether you're connected on LinkedIn or whether you're going to send an email, when you include a video message there, short, under a minute, you introduce yourself, you thank them for the work that they've done, something. You're going to tell them something that can't be faked, right? This book was super meaningful to me, and here are two ways it was. I would love to host you in a conversation, not just about that, but about some of the other things I've seen you, speaking about or writing about recently. Is that something you'd be open to, right? When you reach out in that way and you're a real person who really sees them and understands them, who is sincere and enthusiastic about what you're doing, it's just super powerful. And I think that was a key reason I got some of the yeses that I did early on.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that, as you asked me to there, Ethan, was that you took the personalization in your follow-up as well, in asking guests to share the episode, in asking them who else should you have on the show, which benefits you as the host, but also shows like, hey, you added value. I bet you know some other people who could add value, which is, another deposit in the emotional bank account, if we want to go with that analogy this morning, which why not? And I just want to recap some of the things that you said there, whether it's a video, although I'm a big proponent of BombBomb and video messaging in general, make the message personal, make it succinct. I think that's important. You touched on that, but understand the world that people are living in. Make it unique. We're not talking about spamming a bunch of people with deep fake videos that say, hey, Ethan, and it looks like a movie with bad subtitles. punching in the name, and make your pitch specific as well. You mentioned, like, why am I reaching out to you? Why would it be valuable? Show that you know the person and show why you think it would be valuable. So you mentioned some names there: Ann Handley, Joey Coleman. Love his book, Never Lose a Customer Again. I remember that episode early in your show. You also partnered with your sales team. So you mentioned some of the questions you were asking, Ethan, tied into questions your team wanted to know about the market that you guys serve. How did that play in that relationship with sales as they're looking at target account lists, as they're looking at, hey, here are larger organizations that we're, it's the long game, but we're trying to build a relationship there as well. I think you touched on something that we've hit on in multiple episodes of this show of marketing with, and then fill in the blank. You touched on some influencers, some content creators, but also customers and prospects. Talk to me about those second two, I guess, and where the partnership with sales, what did that look like in co-creating content with the market that you guys serve?
Yeah, you mentioned the key term, which is target account list, and whether that is for prospects to turn into customers, or whether that's customers for expansion or even for retention. Certainly partnering with, just as anyone would that's doing account-based marketing, whether it's for acquisition or whether it's for expansion, podcasting is a wonderful partner here for a variety of reasons. One, obviously, people are much more willing, and let's just say an executive in a target account, whether it's a prospect account or a customer account, is much more likely to take you up on being featured on a podcast where they're going to be made to look and sound fantastic, to open up the relationship, to create some mutual understanding, to understand their point of view, to get some insights that, don't show up in formally published stuff. Like their marketing team is publishing content, their website looks a certain way and communicates things. Having direct access to an executive or a leader or whoever the economic buyer is inside that account is something that typically isn't available anywhere else unless they're prolifically publishing on LinkedIn, for example, which I'd say on average is still pretty rare for an executive. And so there's just so many benefits to creating a list of potential podcast guests that is tied and joined at the hip with any account-based marketing effort, whether, again, that's a prospect account or a customer account. And one of the things I've seen in both of the shows that I host is that when an episode itself super pops, like all of a sudden, like out of the gate in the first 3 days, it's already at the average of any episode released after 2 weeks, and let's just say, in terms of streams and downloads. Not that that's the only measure, but it's a sign. What happens so often is that episode, they may not repost it, they may not use the video clips or the graphics you create for them to promote it online, but they're sharing it internally. And so when you look at all of the new people viewing your profile on LinkedIn, when you look at new followers of the page, if it's separate from your brand page or even on your brand page, you're going to see that a lot of those people work at some of those target accounts, especially in bigger ones. I have one running right now. The company has maybe, I don't know, I'm guessing because I didn't look specifically, but let's just say 5,000 employees, big, not gigantic, definitely not small. And one of the posts that I put up like a week and a half ago is just running for me, like something that's approximately viral. And all of the new followers of the page are all from the same company. Some of them have reached out to connect with me. Some of them are just viewing my profile. If it seems like someone I'd have something in common with, I would certainly turn that into a connection request myself. And so it's just, and then the conversation's wide open. Now it's not just, I'm going to reach out to invite you onto a podcast, which is now a 1 hour commitment approximately on your part to kind of do a short pre-call and to record the episode. And maybe I haven't been on a podcast before and it feels like a thing that I may or may not want to get into. Now I can say, hey, saw this, saw that. Would you jump on a 15-minute Zoom call with me? I'd love to ask you just a couple questions about this, that, and the other thing. So it just opens the doors to these relationships in an informal way. But it all stems from this idea of having a target. Who do we want to be in conversation with? Who do we want to learn from? Who do we want to share our platform with? And who would we be a good business partner with going forward? And when you have answers to those questions, the podcast becomes a natural platform to drive that stuff in a variety of different ways beyond the obvious.
I think that is a perfect example of one of the lines that you mentioned earlier. I think it was tied to that blog post that you were talking about that's a dozen years old at this point, is that who matters more than how many, because of LinkedIn, even without ads, just looking organically at your statistics for your podcast page and for your personal profile, where am I getting more followers? Oh, it's within this account where we just hosted the executive on the podcast. It doesn't really matter that this post didn't blow up and reach, thousands and thousands more people, the post or the episode, but it is reaching more of the who. And this is exactly what I hear Isaac and Jared talking about so much that's just been burned in my brain of living in market. So often we want to just push things to the market and just have our message get there, but we don't want to step over the wall and get into the market. But when you do, then you're able to actually what we've been talking about with nearbound marketing, you're able to surround those people that you're trying to reach, because that executive, you now have a one-to-one relationship. The people within that account now have somewhat of a relationship with you, or at least some awareness of BombBomb that they didn't have before through the podcast, through your personal profile, right? And so now when the sales team is reaching into that account, even if it isn't, coordinated through a direct exec introduction from you and the executive, kind of facilitating an intro between the companies, there's still more of a connection. They've still been kind of surrounded before that engagement. Anything else you want to call out there in the ways that partnering with sales works, even if it's building on that? Hey, after kind of we saw something here, we're seeing some views. How did some of those, follow-up motions work once you were able to surround an account a bit through the relationship with the executive, the content that came out of that episode that got distributed within the account?
Yes. First, though, I'm going to just add one thing to what you said, which is, we're so busy pushing things out into the market. And why are we doing that? We're doing that in order to create conversation and create relationship. And so there are a number of ways to get to that end. And when we look at the playbook, the easiest, most comfortable thing to do is just follow the playbook, which is create a bunch of content and push it out into the market. I still personally manually cut the video highlights out of the episodes for both of the shows that I host, because I regard it as a second layer of learning. If you are hosting a conversation, you want to be a very active listener to do the things that you're doing right now, Logan, which is restating, adding on, turning that into a question. That takes a lot of active engagement. And so for me to create some distance, I recorded the episode 3, 4, 5 days ago, and I'm going to download all the video. I'm going to bring it into Premiere, and I'm going to kind of experience the episode again in my own way, seeking little highlights. And so when I get done doing that, I'll share those directly with the salesperson that is, or the CSM who is interested in that account. In some cases, I generally haven't been releasing full episodes of video of the customer experience podcast, but I have produced out pretty easily, in kind of a underproduced type of way, the full video, and sharing that with a handful of folks too. Sometimes it's a salesperson, sometimes it's a CSM, sometimes it's a team. Sometimes it's a particular executive on our team who's interested in that account or interested in that vertical that person is coming from, that type of a thing. And so that's primarily around this idea of what do they look like? What do they sound like? How do they describe this? What language are they using? In a lot of cases, an adept person already knows those things because, for example, I've been having some folks who are in home building on the customer experience podcast, and the AE that has tons of relationships in home building already knows all the terms. In fact, he taught them to me so that I could write email sequences and some of the other stuff that I've done related to that vertical. But that's also helped me host these people with confidence in a way where I'm using their language with them, not so jargony that the average listener couldn't follow along, but so that they know I understand them and they feel confident and comfortable with me as a person, with us as a company. They know who we are, et cetera, et cetera. And so, sharing the content back directly, sometimes even pre-release. And by the way, that can also help you for the podcast host out there that feels like she or he is kind of alone on this mission and isn't getting the buy-in of the people around them inside the company to co-promote the episodes. Certainly your AE or CSM who's motivated by a lot more listening of this episode will, if you share the content before the episode's released, then they're asking you the question you would love to be asked by any of them, which is, when is this episode releasing? When is this episode releasing? When is this episode releasing? And so you can kind of like, hey, next week, day after tomorrow, this morning, just to kind of create some excitement around it. So that's just one add-on there.
That's super tactical there. I love that you came back to that. That is the question every podcast host wants people to be asking, whether it's on LinkedIn or internally or externally or the guest, right? So that's absolutely true. I love what you said there in talking about the relationship with the AE or the CSM. You're informing them, you're giving them intel into the market that they wouldn't have been able to get otherwise, especially if you don't sell to and market to marketers. I always heard this as being part of an agency where we marketed to marketers. Logan, it's so much easier. Like, all of your customers are active on LinkedIn. You can see what they're talking about. Not every organization has that benefit. By hosting people from your market on your podcast, you're able to get some of that. But I like what you said is that it was going both ways. You went to your AEs and your CSMs. If you've got a larger sales team and maybe they're split up a little bit, verticalized in focusing on different industries, they can help you live in market. Like you said, not to make your episodes and your content super full of jargon, but to make your guests feel comfortable, because you can go live in market kind of as a wolf in sheep's clothing, but that's going to be sniffed out pretty soon. And foundational to all of this relationship building, marketing together, really is trust. And it's that sharing of information between you as the evangelist and your sales team and your CS team that help you build that trust that, look, we understand. We have a lot to learn, and we're still taking that approach of, you're really the expert. You're in the market. You're sitting in the seat. You're trying to get to your promised land. So it's not about us, but we need to show that we're not just coming out of left field like, hey, let's help you get somewhere. We don't know where you're going. So I think that is really good. So often when it comes to a podcast or a webinar or anything, it's we create these assets, then we go to the sales team and say, hey, can you guys post this? Here's a graphic. We'll write a post for you. And then it falls flat. It sounds like with this approach where you were really aligning with the sales and CS team before the content was created, you had a much more eager audience internally. How did that change the dynamic between marketing and sales and CS internally because of that initial alignment and coming to them with the clips, with the episode beforehand?
Exactly as you would expect. They feel supported. They feel seen. They feel like there's a partnership here. The other thing I'll add on to it tactically is as soon as you get someone lined up from one of these accounts, you go to them and say, hey, I got the CMO of this particular company, or I got the CRO or the VP sales or whatever from this. What do I need to know about this company? Like, where are we at with them? What do you want to know about them? Like, you give them the chance to feed questions, or, and they don't often, they're not in this mindset. They're not thinking about like, well, what if I could interview an executive from this company? But even asking and engaging them in that conversation from the minute you get that commitment that they're going to guest on the show, that starts that whole buy-in process. And it also then creates a more effective episode out of the gate. And in part, what they're bringing you is either questions or insights that you can turn into questions that you would never have had otherwise, that then further allows the guest to feel seen and heard, because you're asking specific questions that they either have something to say about, or they are struggling with or thinking about or working on, or it's kind of a thrust of theirs internally, and you're just tapping a button that you wouldn't be able to tap otherwise, that makes the guest, and as a consequence, then the episode better as well. So again, it's all mutual.
I love how taking this relationship-focused approach very tactically in the things that you do and how you reach out to the guest, in how you select the guest in tandem with your sales and CS team and their target account lists, how you have the relationship focus to approach them before the episode. All of these things don't just have one benefit, right? I asked that question asking, how does this benefit your relationship with the sales team and the CS team in them promoting the episode and sharing that and those sorts of things? And you said, yeah, that exists, but it also makes the episode better. And it also makes them more engaged in what we're doing with the content. Even if they don't give me great insights to ask better questions, they feel more a part of the process. And like everything that we've asked Ethan, or we've been talking about here, has multiple benefits. And I think that has something to do with kind of the messy web that is human relationships. Not everything is a straight line. All of these things, when you do this, it's not as direct, it's not as attributable sometimes, but it does have this expanding effect, because that's the way that relationships work. There's a reason that we talk about, our network. It's not a straight line. I have this contact, I have this friend, and I have this acquaintance. It's a network, and it's a little bit messy at times. There was a great deck a while back talking about building an ecosystem is not like building a building, it's like cultivating a garden. And I really like that. I forget where that came across. I think it was from a previous episode of Partner Up, but I digress. Let's get back on track here, because something you talked about earlier, Ethan, is human-centered communication. And that was the title of your second book. And tell me a little bit about how the relationships with the guests of the podcast, some of them influencers and content creators, and some of them people in the market that you're trying to serve, target accounts, existing customers where there's expansion opportunity, all these folks that benefit the company to have relationships with in the market. You found a way to tie in another pretty big campaign with the relationships that you build through this podcast, through the content collaboration. Tell us a little bit about how that came to fruition.
Yeah, Steve, who was our CMO at the time and a longtime friend of mine, we've worked side by side. He co-authored the first book with me. We were discussing a problem that we saw in the market around our product and our service. And for the sake of time, I won't get into the nature of it, but we decided that the first book was pretty successful. We think there's some buy-in internally to do another one. It's something I certainly enjoyed. And this one was a lot different. The process was a lot different. And so we decided that we would make a list of people we knew and or wanted to know who we were confident had something unique and powerful to say about building human relationships across the digital divide, primarily using video, not exclusive to video, email, and video messaging. But the first place I looked was the giant spreadsheet I keep with all the information about all the episodes. And I was like, yes, no, 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 yes, no, no, maybe, 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 no, no, yes, 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 no, no, no. And so that was it. And so we started developing this list of people and what are their backgrounds? What are their specialties? We didn't want it exclusively to be salespeople like Dan Tyre from HubSpot or, Mario Martinez Jr. from Vengresso. We wanted a variety of folks, including like Shep Hyken, who's a customer service. A couple of my podcast guests have referred to him as the godfather of customer service and customer experience. So we wanted a variety of perspectives, but people who we knew were very committed to video as a channel to build relationship and to connect and communicate, not exclusively, again, asynchronously. And it was an immediate yes from everyone, especially those who had been on the podcast, because it was an ask for another interview, right? So they knew me, I knew them, they knew my level of intent. They knew my level of commitment to the work, my work ethic, my standards for quality of production, etc. And when I tell you I'm going to write a book, I've already written one, you've already experienced the podcast experience, would you join me and Steve in a 2-hour conversation about themes like these that we're going to turn into a chapter of a book? It was yes from every single person that we decided to formally ask. And so the podcast just made all of that happen. And then these people helped co-promote the launch of the book, and we landed on the Wall Street Journal bestseller list. And so, again, another extension, second layer, third layer. Episode 100 and 200 of the Customer Experience podcast were like digest episodes where I had 10 highlights in episode 100 from 10 guests on episodes 1 to 99. Episode 200 was 12 clips from guests on episodes 101 through 199. And then those become co-promoted as well. And so there are a lot more things you can do besides the episode itself, whether it's a book or some other heavier weight content that you're going to, create as a new extension, building on the previous relationship, or even something more immediate, creating something new of the podcast episodes you've already created, that the buy-in and the relationship and the co-promotion with the people who are featured in it becomes another layer of the partnership too.
So good. Two things I'll call out there. I know my friend Justin Simon, who's talking all about these days about repurposing content, going to your pillar content, breaking it down. I think it's something that a lot of marketers talk about, but they don't really have a system and a framework for doing that. So if you're a marketer and that rings true with you, go follow Justin Simon on LinkedIn right now. That just was front of mind as Ethan was talking just now. And the other thing, Ethan, I think that sometimes the devil is in the details, as the old saying goes. I think a lot of marketers kind of fool themselves into, yes, we do take this relationship-based approach to our marketing. Like, we have a webinar series. We always have a guest. We have a podcast. We always have a guest. But so often, I think that the approach, and this is where I think the small shift makes a big difference. Who can we get that has a lot of followers? And they're asking who, but it's just about how many. Really, like the who is just a vehicle. It's almost just like a quick checkbox, and then we move on to the next thing. And they're not approaching the who with the intentionality, with the specific steps, with the things that we've talked about here in personal outreach and giving them a reason and aligning with your internal team of who that who is, those sorts of things. So we have the who, but it's almost like it's not getting the importance that it needs. It's, okay, we did a webinar, sweet, we got this person, who are we on to next, right? And we're not going back to those people and realizing that it took a good bit for them to say yes, as we've talked about here. Some are easier yeses than nos and all that sort of stuff. But they've already said yes. We've identified them as someone who can help us surround our target market. Why would we not go back to those people? Why can't we have them on our webinar again or on our podcast again? Why can't we interview them for a book, or why can't we bring them into a conference? And I think, I don't know why that is. What would you say to that of why does the who kind of get included, but just get ticked off really quickly, and we don't do these things of continue to build the relationship with that person that we co-created content with, go back to them and ask them to do something more like you guys did with the book?
Yeah, I think it goes back to this kind of siloing thing that I mentioned off the top. Now, I was talking departmentally and everyone understands that, but I even think like mentally we silo things a little bit too hard. Like this is the podcast. These three people are the people who are involved in producing and bringing the podcast to life. This is what we do with the podcast. And I'm starting to see signs, and I'm sure you are too, that a lot of people are viewing the podcast as a much smaller piece of a much bigger opportunity. So I think this will kind of start to fall away, and you'll start to see more behavior like what you're asking about. But in general, I just don't think a lot of people are, it's even on the radar to say, let's create something new. Let's double back on some of the key ideas. Let's lean back into these relationships. And I'll tell you, like, I look at my guest list of 250 plus, and certainly some of them you connected with a lot more than other people. Some people brought more to it, and you clicked more with them, and you felt more connected to them. They see the world more similarly to the way that you do. And so, I don't know what the ratio is, but let's just say 1 in 5, or, somewhere between 1 in 5 and 3 in 5 of people who you've done something with in the past, who you clicked with, connected with, would be happy to do something that would be very values aligned, perspective aligned, point of view aligned with how you see the world and what you're looking to get done in the world, the change you're looking to drive with, through, and for your customers, the transformation you're looking to drive in their lives and businesses. And it's worth another look. And sometimes I think you could even go back and look at something like a podcast guest list with that in mind, and then try to imagine what to do with it from there. Look at the people. rope people together into small groups and imagine, what could I do with these? Should I bring them back on for a panel discussion episode about something that they all remind me of, or something that we talked about in each one of these episodes, but only for 2 or 3 minutes each? Let's bring all 3 of those people together and talk about it for 25 minutes or 35 minutes or whatever. So there are a number of ways to approach it, but I think it's to the spirit of your question. I think it really is this, well, that's the podcast, and the podcast is the podcast, and we did the podcast, and we're doing new episodes of the podcast. And it's just the vision isn't there yet necessarily to go into some of these directions.
And it's also, I think, one of the themes of this episode today has been we put the how in front of the who, right? The siloing of our different campaigns, of our different motions, the podcast, the webinar, our blog, our LinkedIn content. We're thinking about, how do we fill the next thing? How do we find the next guest? How do we find someone to contribute to this blog? We're not leading with who. I thought was really interesting for those listening. Hit the back button a few times. What Ethan just said there, focus on who, like look at who you created content with before you start thinking about what's the next message, what's the next topic. You might just be benefited by going back to, okay, we're at 50 episodes of our podcast. Who are the top 10 people that really brought the fire? Get them together and just say, hey, I'm thinking about doing some sort of collaboration with you and these other people. Guess what? You were, in my mind, one of the top 10 episodes, and the stats bear that out, right? Invest in that relationship a little bit in some tactical ways there and make them feel good about it, and just focus on the who, and then the how might just surface. How are we going to do this? What's the message that we're going to bring to the market? But so often it's, okay, we developed the content calendar. We got to find someone who can speak on this, right? And if we're honest, what we've determined as the topic was just self-sourced. It was us as marketers sitting in a room and saying, oh, we got to fill something, right? But why don't we go back to the who and let that inform the how, and it can be more powerful. So I think that's a great place to wrap it up, and another great tactical insight from you, Ethan. And the last thing I'll say on that is, the more that you co-create content with someone, the easier it becomes, right? You and I hopped on this, no pre-call, probably about 4 minutes of just talking a little bit, and me taking literally like 5 lines of notes of just, and each line is like 1 or 2 words. And I think we made a really great episode together because we have that relationship, because we've created content together in the past. So, Ethan, any final parting words or places that you want to point people to in where they can find more of your great content? Because it does not stop with just this episode.
Appreciate it so much. Last name it's Ethan Beute. Last name is spelled Beute. Hit me up on LinkedIn or any of the social networks. That way, the podcast is just the Customer Experience Podcast. You can find it in all the players or at BombBomb.com/podcast. And Human-Centered Communication, if you want to check that out and see the 11 different experts that Steve and I roped into that one. We decided to make that one free to celebrate its 1-year anniversary. So we enhanced the digital version ourselves and put it up free at BombBomb.com/freebook.
I love it, man. Well, thank you so much for making time for yet another conversation. It will not be the last, in line with our conversation on continuing relationships today. And I think you shared some very tactical things. For those of you listening, definitely follow Ethan, check out his podcast. Also, Chief Evangelist is a great show that I've been getting a lot of value from as well, that Ethan hosts. And remember, no matter who it is, the influencers that you're working with, your internal sales and CS teams, it's more evidence that we go further faster when we're marketing together.